Hello and welcome to this Oliver White panel discussion on leadership and change. I'm Oliver Pickup. I'm a London-based technology and business journalist, and we are going to be asking today, is your leadership the reason business change keeps failing? It's definitely an uncomfortable question, and we're going to be exploring why people don't always support change and how understanding that helps organizations make it stick. And by not supporting, we mean a spectrum of responses from open rebellion to quiet indifference. So to help frame the conversation today, I have found some recent research. The first piece comes from Gartner from 2025 that found that only 32% of leaders globally achieve healthy change adoption, which means that 2/3 get it wrong. And the same piece of research found that 79% of employees have stopped trusting change entirely. Notably, organizations that get adoption right see twice the revenue growth of those that don't. And also, McKinsey's latest findings from November 2025 show the average employee now faces 10 planned change programs every year, and that's 5 times more than a decade ago. Yet most leaders still use the same outdated playbook. Today, we're not discussing managing change. We're exposing how outdated leadership approaches actively increase employee stress, destroy trust, and kill change before it really starts. So to discuss all this with me today are 3 Oliver White partners. We've got Kirsty, Monty, and Les. These are leaders who've taken businesses through complex change. So let's start with the opening question. Broadly, what is the problem? Are leaders the blockers to change, and why is this especially important now? Kirsty, I'm looking at you to kick us off.
Leadership behaviour is at the heart of all of this. So depending on what the leaders drive, want, desire, and how they try and get there is what needs to be addressed. If they're not allowing an environment for where people are very, very open and they're able to challenge themselves, but also explain what's happening and why, rather than, in many cases, giving the leaders what they want to hear, then change will never happen. So without them being on board, nothing will happen.
Yeah. Monty, how would you frame this?
Yeah, I think it's, we talk about leadership being positive about change, right? But we forget that change is often positive because of it challenging things that are already happening. So a big part of the change journey for most leaders is not just a journey of change for their organization. It's a journey of admission of their own way of working, potentially not being the correct way of working, and that needs to change. And in an environment, in a business environment, that's often very results focused and very short-term results focused. Leaders are sometimes very good at creating a speech that motivates for change, but not always so good at creating the example of the change that they want to see in their organizations. And the reality is it's the examples that others follow, not just because they want to follow their leader, but because whatever is on the leader's mind is what the leader will drive in the business. And if they're not prioritizing the behavior and the focus of the change they need in the business, what they say is completely irrelevant.
Well, I suppose they need to lead. They need to walk the talk as well as talk the talk.
But I think walk the talk's easy when, if you say to somebody, we're going to go down and march down the highway, I want the leader in front. The leader says, yes, I'll carry the poster. When we're saying to a leader, we're going to challenge fundamental norms about your behavior and your business's behavior to deliver results. What the people want to see from their leaders is that they are first in admission that things need to change from how they are working today. They're not hedging their bets and saying, well, we'll let the people go through the struggle, but we'll wait and see. And for me, that's the key. It's not the easy change. It's the difficult change when people look at the leaders and their examples.
And so why is there such difficult change now then?
I think if you think about change, and often the change programs that we drive within businesses, what we're asking leaders to do is to admit that what they are doing today is not working, or that there is a better way, right? And this often, you can talk about this at a very altruistic way, but the reality is it challenges business results, and it challenges the messages that lives within their businesses, right? But it also challenges the speed at which people want to operate when change happens. Change is tough. I don't want to come to work every day and have a tough day. I want you to make the change, and then we move on to the next thing. If I feel I have to make the change 5, 6, 7 times because my leader's behavior is lagging behind the change that we're driving, then that doesn't come across to me as a leader that's genuine about that change. So we have to understand that it is the speed with which leaders change that is often as important as the way they change. And that speed of change only comes with a quick reconciliation. I would put this: if you're leading change, one of the most important things you have to do as a leader is reconcile very quickly how what you believe and what you need to do will change between where you are now and where you need to be. If that reconciliation takes a long time, you lose the audience.
Well, that McKinsey stat, Les, I found amazing. So that, employees now face 10 planned change programs every year, 5 times more than a decade.
And I guess that's really the big issue here, isn't it? That if there was one change a decade ago and we all need to manage that, then actually that was far easier. The size of the change probably was still significant, but our ability to put the resource in, get the support from teams, use our change management approach, etc. In many ways, it was easier. But now, obviously, we're bombarded with technology driving change, other programs externally driving the need for transformation. And so change comes from so many different places. And I guess having an overall view of where are we going as a leadership team and understanding the future capabilities that we want to develop, and actually being in that place ourselves to say, so against these capabilities, what does that mean to us as leaders, right? What does it mean that we need to change in terms of our focus to drive the outcome that we want to see? Because I'm a firm believer that people don't behave badly. They behave in a way that we want them to, because we have focused them that way. So actually, if we want change to happen, we have to first visit what we expect in terms of the change, understand what that means in terms of our focus, and then against that new focus, actually guide that change. And so the volume of change absolutely means that we've got to get skillful at that. We can't rely on 8 outside bodies to come in and say, right, I want you to run a change program, because actually it's as much of a skill as the processes we use to run the business. And so we have to develop that skill as leaders. We have to go through that proven path type approach that says, okay, what's the change? What's the future capabilities? What does that mean I need to do in terms of change of focus? How do I tell that story to ensure that people can engage? And then above all, how do I then behave as a leader to align to that revised focus so that people are encouraged to make the change? Because if I say to people, I need us to focus more on the mid to longer term so that we avoid issues in the short term, but I then behave by looking at the short term all the time, then clearly I'm not going to get the revised focus from my team. So absolutely, more frequency of change needs a different approach. It needs to be a skill set, not something we call upon externally. Can you come and run this change program? Because at frequency of 10 a year, we can't afford to keep doing that. And every time we do this, we should improve, right? We won't improve if we're using external people to actually run a change program for us.
And I suppose building on that, what's happened over time is if you look at how often people change roles, certainly from a leadership perspective, then nowadays it's, you're lucky if they're in the role 2 years and then it moves on. And this is all about the people and the people engaging and aligning and working together. And so if you're having that churn, then there's that need to make that change so much quicker as well. So that's what's driving these additional focus and programs. But you've got to ask your question: to what result, to what gain? Rather than just be programs for program's sake to try and tick the boxes, so that you're in a position to move on after your sort of 2-year stint and leave some legacy behind.
And I mean, you hinted at this, Les, but having a kind of myopic view as a leader breeds distrust, isn't it? So talk me through what bad looks like here, Monty. What are the ramifications if leaders get this wrong?
Well, I mean, very clear example of this recently in a major client, right? We spent months telling the business how to operate. Everybody in that business knew that the first big test for this program was the leadership behavior during the upcoming budgeting process, because everything we've done with that business was about rebasing the organization, understanding that they're in a challenging environment, understanding that they've got a mismatch in their product portfolio versus what the market wants, understanding that they need to drive the right things. Everybody got excited about the potential of their organization reinventing itself for a new market. But they all knew that the big test was going to be, come budget time, is the leaders going to develop a future vision for the future that fits with everything we've worked together? Or are they going to go back to their old behaviors of, well, I need 10% more next year than this year, and I don't care where you get it, and I'm not going to accept a plan that shows anything different, because that's what they've always seen. So example of what they don't want, everybody, including that very same leadership team, have agreed that's not what we want to do. But the reality is there's a test. And then what happens? That leadership team failed that test 100%. Every dollar they spent on our change program, out the window.
Right.
So what bad looks like is when you don't understand as a leader when these critical tests are going to be, not the ooh-la-las of the program, these critical tests that this space of work will give you in your business. And then you make the choice not to behave in the way that you agreed you will. And I mean, I'm using that example, but there are so many other examples. If we agree as a leadership team that we will not be working in the short term, but then a week later we pick up the phone to somebody who's excited about this change and ask them to please tell us why a truck didn't reach a certain customer yesterday. Once again, why are you not changing? If we as a leadership say to our team, this exciting program of work requires a different skill set and we will bring in the right team, and the first time that team leader goes to the leader and says, I need this resource, and the leader goes, there's a headcount freeze in this business, and you know that. It's just, people know. They know. I almost used the word here, but they know where the tests are. They know. If the leaders don't know where the tests are, or if they fail those tests knowing where they are, that's when things go south. And we could probably spend another 20 minutes talking about different examples of this, but I think you get my...
Well, I mean, it might be nice to tease out a few more examples, but I mean, as you were saying, Kirsty, I mean, it is a people thing. It is, leaders are being tested here, and trust is so essential, so it's quite hard to bring that back, isn't it, Les?
I guess another example, though, the world of AI at the minute. And one of the terrifying stats is 95% of AI-type activities fail to deliver the value. And actually, if you really start to dig into that and ask why, often it's to do with leadership adoption, especially when leadership adoption is around using the outcome of that to make decisions. I guess the older analogy would be people, first of all, adopting route planners in their cars, right? Google Maps, etc., and not switching it on because they knew the way, right? And then when they did switch it on, it was too late because they were already stuck in the traffic jam. In many ways, it's the same thing because it's all about change. If you ask people to come up with better ways of looking at decisions around making whatever business decision, but then you aren't able to adopt that model, you need to ask why not. And it's predominantly because you weren't ready to accept the change in the way that you needed to work that would bring about. And so often that's what we find, that people ask for something, but because they haven't visited, what does this actually mean to us as leaders? If we make this change and it works, what does it mean that we will need to do to actually proactively then adopt this change and make use of it? Because if we're not able to adopt it, then it's going to fail. We often, in Oliver White, we talk about this thing called the point of commitment. I've actually, not that long ago, said to an organisation, you're not ready for this change as leaders because we've gone through what it means and you've said you're committed, but actually you're not really.
So what made you
Because-
think that, Les? Why did you think they weren't ready?
Because you can just tell in the way, and this is interesting, that these sorts of conversations are the ones you need to have face to face, where you can actually see people's body language. Because when you're looking at people's body language versus some people's video being on, some people's video being off, you can actually see what they're really thinking.
It's not performative.
Exactly. And you know what they say about, you can listen with your eyes as well as your ears. In an environment where it's virtual, it's difficult to listen with your eyes. When you're face to face and you see when people are talking about commitment that they're wavering in their body language, then you can dig into that more. When you then find out, actually, I'm being pressured here to have this view of commitment, but actually there are some issues I have. It's actually understanding those issues that leadership have so that you can actually truly get everybody to the point of commitment or change the desired outcome, that you then can be successful. Because if you move past that point of commitment before there really is commitment, then we're lost, right? Because there's too many opportunities, to Monty's point, for people to look, to expect to see something, not see it, and then revert to type.
Yeah, I think that the great insight there, Les. And I think the stat that you're referring to, the 95% stat, is the recent MIT research that found that 95% of all AI projects hadn't gone anywhere further than pilots. It hadn't gone to production. There was no ROI. There was quite a small sample size. But I think the point here is no one likes change. It's in human nature. We're very distrustful of change generally.
I guess it depends on you.
Right.
Because early on, I guess, in my career in industry, I guess actually I quite thrived on change.
Yeah.
And actually, in many ways, that's why I decided eventually, after various C-suite roles, to join Oliver White, because I liked the change piece more than I liked the normal status quo that you achieved afterwards. So I guess you're either a person that actually can cope with that and actually thrive in that environment, or you're not. I don't know what the stats are on that, but I guess if you're doing 10 a year and some go well and some don't, and you're on the receiving end, you're less likely to be, change ready, if you like, and motivated for it, because you're probably taking a deep breath in and thinking, oh, here we go again. The last one didn't work. Is this one going to work? I'm going to put a lot of energy into it because I like change, but then people let me down.
Mm.
So I don't think everybody is against change more than they may be looking for what makes it successful.
Yeah.
Right. And so if different individuals will have a different view, but if we push too many people to the adverse point of change, then it's going to get more and more difficult. Hence why we're having this conversation. Yeah.
I think this, I love the fact that Oliver White uses the point of commitment, and there's definitely a thrill with going outside one's comfort zone and going through that change. And this is why it's so important to have leaders driving those behaviors, would you say, Monty?
Yeah, I think the point of commitment is very important, but it's also important that when you partner with a business or with a program that drives change, that the point of commitment is a genuine thing, right? I mean, you go through so many programs with go, no-go meetings or process meetings, but it's almost like everything's on autopilot. It's too big to stop or too big to go, whoa, we're not ready as a business for this change. There's too much investment. Somebody's got a big CapEx budget, whatever the case may be. Or it's a technology transformation into new software. And I think the thing about the point of commitment is that it needs to be a two-way street. It needs to be an expert on where we're going, and a leader who understands their business, looking each other in the eye and saying, we both agree we are ready. And if one of the two are saying, I don't think you're ready, and the other one goes, no, man, it's easy. Or if the one says, I think you're ready, and the leader hasn't got that ability to say, well, convince me here because I'm not sure. It's so important that point of commitment isn't just a point of commitment here. It's a point of commitment here, knowing full well what they're going into. And I think that's part of, I don't know how to put it.
Is that control thing though? Is it, do many leaders want to grab their arms around all of this and are a bit worried that they don't know how to fill in the blanks?
It's Good to you go, yeah.
I would say that the leaders like the vision, but will they take and tackle the journey to get there? Because in reality, these things sound easy, but they're very difficult. And most people, in my experience, are uncomfortable about the change. There are one or two that absolutely thrive on it, but most people actually find it very difficult. And I think human nature generally, we resist until we understand what the value is, because we've come to a situation where we're in an environment that we've controlled, that enables us to feel comfortable where we are now. And now somebody's saying, and now you've got to get out of that environment and now do something different.
So to build on that, though, I guess, from the interesting thing is as well that people can easily be misled. So about a year ago, we won a major RFP with one of the major FMCG, CPG businesses in the world. They'd already had a diagnostic completed. And so they wanted to start the program of improvement, i.e. the change, if you like, the transformation, as they were calling it. And so we started the program, still did some interviews of the CEO, various other people, but nowhere the depth, because they'd assumed that they'd already gone through understanding what the program was about, so hence the RFP. We won the RFP because we told them what they didn't want to hear, right, in terms of how to go about this, which I think is refreshing in the first instance. Then we started to do some design work. Some of that work needed to be fed back to this same C-suite that had actually decided to do this transformation. They, for the first time, started to truly understand what it actually meant in terms of change of the ways of working. That business, anything they wanted to do in terms of promotional offers, etc., literally they would put those offers out there to the market in whichever region, and literally within a day or two, they would have multiple of the big chains saying yes, they wanted that offer. So even if they were down on volume, they could get volume, they could get revenue. Whether they get margin was a debate. It was only when they realised, because we were being truthful about what was going to change with them, that they really started to panic. They actually got to the point where they did lots of the design work and then said, right, we've got a great design, we recognise that, our people in our teams really like this, but, and here's the big but, we're not ready to go that far. So how can we now attack this more gradually? Because we recognise that we have to change so much in our behaviours around short term and driving right down to minutiae of why have we got this problem just here, that's such a big change to the way we've run this business for the last 30 years that we're not ready. Now, what's interesting is, why did they get to the point in the first place where they issued an RFP, tendered for that RFP, decided to go with that, only to retrospectively find that out? I guess some of it comes down, and, it's not something we should be proud of, Oliver White can be, the morals of people accepting business without actually those leaders understanding what it would mean, right? Because too often, I think, people are told what they want to hear to get somebody to sign off business for consultants, right? And that fundamentally causes failure. Did you want to pick us?
And that's exactly the words seem simple. The actions are much, much greater, and they have to go so much broader to make the change stay and to make the change stick. And that's where I think leaders get very frightened, is when they realise what they're really asking for. It absolutely starts with them, but then they've got to lead the charge all the way through the organisation. And that's often what we find, without the right understanding, coaching and support, just that step too far.
Before we look into the second part of this session, which is why does this happen, I just want to pose a question around, you mentioned a legacy company there, Les. Is this more of a problem with companies that are, have that legacy or have that size? And is there something around even the age of leaders? You're shaking your head there, but let's get you in, Monty. What do you think?
I wish I could say that, you could identify the personality or the leader by the size of the company or the age of the company. I do think, to be honest, from a completely different perspective, and I know you're getting to the why just now, the investment environment for large companies doesn't help them drive change that is challenging. They are forced to drive change that is safe. A, because they have to deliver results, but B, they have to be able to blame a person, not themselves, if the change fails. So there is a bit of I would say, in large organizations, a pattern of behavior around how they drive real change in the organization. There is often a bit of a untouchable bit here where they would say, well, we'll do it, but we won't really do it, or we'll do it, but as soon as it gets too tricky or too complex or starts challenging, I would say, the boringness of our past, then we might be a lot more cautious. And so I think that environment plays a role. But I think ultimately, the biggest challenge with change is the same challenge you as an individual have to make a change in your own habits, right? Is that when I am doing something that's inherently painful every day, it's easy to make the change, right? But when I am making a change to an organization where I am because of my past behaviors, where I'm typically in a senior position with a track record due to a long history of doing some things consciously and subconsciously, where I am within a corporate ecosystem that is a lot more subtlety about the relationships between me and my colleagues and the kind of office politics and everything else. Boldness of leadership is a difficult thing. And it's easy to be bold where it's safe. It's easy to buy a new IT tool because it's a safe boldness. It's easy to commission a McKinsey to do a report because it's a safe boldness. But the boldness that changes your organization is that personality boldness. It's a boldness of leadership. It isn't a boldness of age or a boldness of company size, if that makes sense. What we've got to get leaders to understand, I think, in that space is that the change that you're driving is safe if it's successful, because good change is always successful if it's delivered. The reality is that I would say that of all the organizations I've worked with, and I would say Kirsty and Les would certainly say exactly the same thing, the amount of bold initiatives that have failed because of the disconnection of leadership through the journey because they lost their bravery is significantly more than the bold initiatives that had failed because they were conceptualized wrongly to start with, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Monty. But again, as you said, maybe if the bigger the organization, the bigger the pressures from various stakeholders. So is there something, like you were shaking your head before, Les, but is there something about, let's say, a startup versus, a big FMCG company? There's certain restrictions maybe that
I guess with startups, and again, it depends where they're startups. If it's a pure startup, a new mega plant for batteries, then clearly there's a hell of a learning curve. People are accepting there to be change because it's part of the learning curve of improvement to get to the point where you're running a brand new business. I guess the other side of it is acquisitions, right? Or divestments. When somebody venture capitalists end up buying parts of legacy business. Well, of course, their whole focus is how do we get the return on investment, which generates all sorts of behavior. So we've been recently working with one where this has happened. And of course, the natural behavior is all about results. Everything is about this month's results because we need to demonstrate the improvement to the venture capitalists that will reach a point where, A, they're getting their return on the investment, but potentially they'll then float it off and sell it to somebody else. So everything is about short term, and it delivers results because when the legacy business hasn't been performing, somebody comes in, there's normally fat, right? There's normally places we can cut and make change, but it's a very different discipline type of change, right? And some people are used to that. So typically the leader that ends up leading that business will be this style, right? Where they can deliver results. The focus is on short-term results. That's what they want everybody to be into. So that's what you get. Probably no different to somebody driving a value proposition in Ryanair. You know, if you focus on everything's got to be down on cost, that's the result you're going to see. So in those businesses, that happens. When they then run out of fuel, in terms of they bled all of the benefits out of the short term that were there to take, but they've then got to focus on the future portfolio to meet future needs, alignment of plans. That's a different environment then. So all of a sudden, we're going to switch from this behaviour request of people to this behaviour. And we're also going to say we as leaders now need to change. That's the challenge.
Yeah.
It's that changing that dimension to say, right, we've driven success here. We've had these behaviours to drive this success. Now we're going to pivot. When we pivot, these are the new behaviours we need. This is the focus we will all have to have as leaders. The challenge is the person that was recruited to lead when it was all about bleed the short term, get the benefits out of the process, deliver results, may not be the person that can change to deliver that future. And so, that's a big dilemma.
Monty, no, we're working with an organisation that's facing very similar challenge. But on top of that, because I was reflecting on your question, on top of that, they've got the same problem. When focusing short term, they were very good, very focused, but they need this extremely large growth journey to be able to deliver and continue to be successful. They're struggling in the same way regarding then how they operate from short term to medium to long term. But on top of that, what dynamic they had as a group, and again, a group of leadership, they work well together. But they've always changed. So if somebody left, somebody else came in. That person that's come in, that I'm sure they are very capable at their job, but they've been used to a very different environment. So they're not declaring anything, are they, Monty? Everything is closed shop because they've worked in an environment where they're not prepared to declare until they're 100% certain they're going to deliver. And because at the moment there is no 100% certainty, they're saying nothing. And so even if you've established an environment that works, it will change because people will change, roles will change.
Yeah, I tell a story sometimes when I talk to clients about this issue, and when they say, well, startup. You know, when Apple was founded, you had Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs in Steve Jobs' dad's garage, and they sit across to each other from desks, right? So if the one picked up the phone and spoke to a customer, the other one heard the specs that they were agreeing. If the technician suddenly discovered a new innovation, within minutes, the sales team knew what that new innovation was because there was complete and total transparency and open communication. Now transpose that model onto a global multinational. Thousands of people all over the world. We still need innovation. We still need boldness of vision. We still need people going to work every day, doing a great job. But you need leadership to recognize that the change in this thing cannot be done by sitting across the table with another leader and talking about what they're doing next. It's about creating an environment that can receive change, receive boldness of vision, and execute that without fear. So often when we talk about change management in a business, what we're actually saying is, how do I get a golden thread between the idea for change and the execution of change that allows me to get the best out of the whole hierarchy? And that's the challenge.
Yeah.
And that challenge exists whether you're a fast-moving startup or whether you're a Leviathan large industrial conglomerate. Because if you don't protect the golden thread, change management becomes about people interpreting the translation at every step of the way, and that's inertia that doesn't work.
And I think actually, as you were saying, Les, we're going to likely see a lot more mergers and acquisitions in this coming year. I mean, there's consolidation of many markets, so this is again why that change is so challenging. We've started moving on to why does this happen now, which is great. We can dig a bit deeper here. If you were to each pick one thing about why you believe people suffer change fatigue, what would you identify?
So I'll start. So I guess for me, the first thing is the programs of activity are far too long in duration, right? So people, it's back to the old analogy about eating the elephant. They sit there and they believe they're going to eat the elephant in one session. And the reality is the change could be broken down into multiple smaller changes that would deliver business benefit. People would see that benefit. They would see leaders using that approach. That generates that air of enthusiasm for change, moves us on to the next piece. Communication is easier of the benefits because we're getting there sooner. So often, this transformation is becoming this sort of dirty word because it is too big. When realistically, 10 a year, you can't have 10 huge transformations. So reality is, if you broke 10 a year into the smaller component parts that they really are to get you to the end result, and focused on what's my overall journey that I want to go on, how do I blend the journey with the change so that it's all seen as one? I always refer to these companies that go to this team building activity to try to make a change in the way the teams work. And they do the raft thing and they go across the lake, hopefully in the summer. Somebody falls off the raft or the raft breaks up. All of those things, And there's a lesson about that in teamwork and how did we work as a team to build the raft? How did we row the raft? Yeah. But typically what happens is that people go back to work and, the month later they're by the coffee machine, they're having a laugh about the person that fell in the lake, right? And it was the boss. 6 months later, they recall a similar thing. But often what happens is that they're being asked to make a change in the way they work as a team, but they're not being given a vehicle to practice on. And so when you've got 10 changes a year, you've got 10 vehicles to practice your change skills against. And, the law of things says that if we all practice continuous improvement of our change skills married to a process that we're going to change, then we should get to the point of being excellent. And that for me is the difference in terms of what we do as Oliver White. We marry the two things together. So we're not just doing the team building by itself. We're actually saying, look, here's the change. Here's the process it marries together with.
Yeah.
Here's the result we want to see. Here's the focus you need to have to be successful. And by the way, we're not going to do one transformation. We're going to do 10 sprints, right? And we're going to infuse people. We're going to give people that level of excitement they need. And for leaders, it's also far easier then to actually be successful because we get the practice each time.
Yeah.
Right. You do still need somebody, and maybe sometimes people see us as a pain, but you do still need somebody that's willing to go to a leader and say to them, look, you said that you would change your focus, but you're not. This is what we need to do. They may not want to hear that, right? But somebody has to do it.
So that's where you need the external help then.
Oh, absolutely,
Someone
because
to
unless you
speak
get
truth.
somebody, if you don't get somebody that's willing to tell the truth, and you can ask yourself why, well, first of all, people internally, it might be career limiting if you go and tell the boss the truth. So maybe you're not the person to do that. Sometimes, dare I say, if you're an external consultancy that's looking for the next piece of work with the next one of the 10 changes, are you likely to go and tell them? Because, you've sold this bigger program? Maybe not. At the end of the day, somebody needs to tell them, otherwise everybody won't be successful. Right? So I guess, that's my opinion.
That's great. And I can't stop thinking about trying to eat an elephant now whole, to be honest with you. I think we're going to pause it there and pick this up on another session. So join us for that session.